Hi everyone, welcome to today's ISSA pre-professional meetup on Google Hangouts. My name is Candy Alexander and I'll be your host today for today's meetup. For those of you who don't know me, I serve on the ISSA International Board of Directors in my day job, if you will, and I'm also the Chief Architect for the Cybersecurity Career Lifecycle. I've grown up in this field and profession and have been working in it for the past 30 years. So it's my pleasure today to introduce our guests, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves. We have Randall and Lily. We'll start with the ladies first. Lily, could you please introduce yourself?
Thank you. My name is Lily Zeman. I've been in the network business for over 15 years. I'm an electronics and computer engineer. I'm finishing my master's degree in cybersecurity and information assurance here in National. I'm from San Diego. I'm a computer for most of my time. And I currently teach at Coleman University, security fundamentals, network security fundamentals, ethics, and policies and procedures. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And Randall?
My name is Randall Fritsch. I am the Information Security Officer for QualChoice Health Plans, which is a subsidiary of Catholic Health Initiatives based in Colorado. I am also an ISSA Fellow, and I was the president of the Kentuckiana chapter in Louisville, Kentucky for 8 years before I moved here to Colorado. And now I'm engaged with the Denver chapter, which is the #1 chapter in the world. I have to get that plug in there. I'm also on the planning committee for the Rocky Mountain Information Security Conference. I am also an adjunct professor at Ivy Tech State College in Indiana, and I teach Security Plus classes, Certified Ethical Hacking, and Digital Forensics. And I am personally have a master's in Information Security and Assurance. I have the CISP, Certified Ethical Hacking, and about 24 certs last time I checked. So that's it.
Great, thank you very much. So I'd just like to remind our participants who are watching live that they can ask questions and learn firsthand what it takes to get things done on the job. Again, today's discussion is all about the basics and where to get started, what are the basics, and all of that good stuff. So if you'd like, I'd also remind folks that are participating today that you can tweet out using the hashtag ISSACSCL to tweet out, and that stands for, of course, ISSA Cybersecurity Career Lifecycle. Before we begin the actual discussion today, I'd just like to say a word or two about the ISSA Education Foundation. The ISSA Education Foundation supports the education of the next generation of the cybersecurity professionals with scholarships for undergraduate and graduate studies. The ISSA will award 3 scholarships this year in 2016. The first one is the ISSA-EF Eugene Schultz Memorial Scholarship, which is being offered at $3,500. The ISSA-EF Scholarship General, which is again another scholarship offered at $3,500, and then the ISSA-EF Sean Harris Memorial Scholarship offered at $2,000. So if you're interested in finding out about any of those scholarships, you can go to the ISSA-EF website, and that is located at www.issaef.org for specific application dates and deadlines. So again, let's go ahead and jump in, Pam. When we talk about information security, there are some basic principles that we need to pay attention to, or that have been defined as the foundation of information security. This goes above, in my opinion, this is what separates IT from IT security, if you will. So when we talk about the fundamentals and the basics, one of the things we always hear about is the CIA model. And I know tongue-in-cheek, we've always, made, hints that it's, secretive, kind of like the federal government, CIA. But that's not what we're talking about, is it, Randall? I'll pick on you first. Can you tell us about the CIA model and why is it important?
Absolutely. Well, I could probably talk all day about that. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and it's normally represented as a triangle because they are all interconnected, but they have different areas that they are intended to apply to. So, for instance, confidentiality. When we think of confidentiality, we're thinking of privacy. When we think of integrity, we're thinking of that the system stays the way it's supposed to stay in the state that we expect it to be in, and that's very important in financial, Wall Street, certainly in healthcare, where I work. It's very important that the data be the way it is, the way we expect it to be. And an example I like to use is if my medical record says that I'm not allergic to something and I really am, and the data is wrong, then that could cause me a big problem. And then availability, of course, is making sure that the system is up when we expect it and need it to be up. So those are the three tenets, and we can also talk about confidentiality as an example. What are the controls that we would think of if we think about confidentiality? One certainly would be a firewall. We don't want anybody on the internet to see what we have on the inside, so we're keeping our internal network confidential. But also password is a confidentiality control. I don't want anybody to see my data, what I have access to, so I have a password that you don't know, hopefully, and so that's a confidentiality measure.
Okay, great, thanks. And Lily, what are your thoughts in regards to the CIA model? What is it? How do you apply it? Why is it important? And what makes it a fundamental or a foundation of our principles in information security? And you're on mute.
The CIA model is of security. The purpose is to secure the data or more important assets, and includes confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Randall was talking about the confidentiality, the integrity, making sure that they don't modify data. When you download open source software, you could be downloading malware, and they apply hashes to those downloads. When you compare the hashes from the software that you download from the one they're publishing on the website, you make sure the information has not been modified. And when you talk about availability, is that you have access to the information at all times.
Okay.
And that is.
So I think, go ahead.
And having information available allows for a company or a corporation to keep clients informed and up to date with the requests.
Okay, so I think that was a really good explanation of what the CIA model is. Now let's talk a little bit about how do we get businesses to apply it, and let me set a foundation here. I know a lot of times I'm now an independent consultant, so I'll be called in to talk with businesses about information security or cybersecurity, and oftentimes I come in and talk with the businesses who are really challenged as to what we do for a job. So one of the first things that I talk to them about is applying the CIA model. And if we take, like Randall had stated, and think of it as a triangle, and the C and the I and the A is all in one point of the triangle, I talk to the business and say, okay, listen, in order for you to determine the value of whatever it is you're looking to protect, we'll say information, and we'll say healthcare in Randall's situation, which is the most important to focus on, because you can't focus on all three at the same time, because A, it's too expensive, B, it's too complex, and C, it's nearly impossible. So what I say to them is it's kind of like goes back to what a lot of folks refer to as the program management triangle, where it's cost, time, and priority, or something like that. So like I'll say to them, so is it more important that it's confidential? Is it more important that it's available, or is it more important that it has integrity? And then that now gets people to really understand the context in which we need to put that in. And so from there, when we apply the CIA model, you're now able to focus on which of those three are the most important measures. And before we get too far along, hi, Tim. Welcome to today's meetup. Hi. Before we get too far again down this CIA model discussion, if you could, Tim, could you please just give us a brief introduction, and then we've been asked to put ourselves on mute when we're not talking. So I'm going to go on mute, and please introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Tim Hoffman. Let's see, in my day job, I'm the lead security engineer for the University of California at San Francisco. 35,000 people or so, 4 data centers, 4 hospitals, leading research organization in the United States. In my second job, I'm the Chief Privacy and Security Officer for a company called More Health. We do co-diagnosis and second opinions internationally. In my third job, I own my own company. Tim Hoffman and Associates, provide security training and services to a wide variety of customers, mostly medium and large. And in my fourth job, I'm the Executive Vice President of the local ISSA chapter here in Colorado Springs. Not sure what you want to know about my background. I got 22 years of the United States Navy, 10 years cryptology, SIGINT, SIGSEC, electronic warfare, electronic countermeasures, director of threat for the NSA. I've done security for better part of my life. Actually, it's been my entire life, and I enjoy it tremendously. And I think that there's opportunities in security that are going to far outstrip any other vertical as far as the opportunity to grow, to learn, to network with people. And I value the time with the ISSA. I think it's the best organization on the planet. But I'm probably being very particular. I like ISSA.
I had picked up on that. I'm just kidding.
I've been in the organization for almost 15 years. It's a great organization.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. So thanks a lot. So again, just talking about the CIA model and using it from that triangle perspective to enable us to have that conversation with businesses as to which is the top of the triangle. Is it the C? Is it the A? Is it the I? To get that conversation started. To me, it's all about getting businesses to understand that, as well as all of us to, again, know what we need to focus on. So I guess since you're still up there, Tim, talk to us a moment about the CIA model. Why is it a fundamental? Why is it the easy for me to say. Why is it a foundation? And how do you use it in business when you're talking with businesses and or the practice of cybersecurity?
Actually, that's a good question. Confidentiality is related directly to security. Mm-hmm. So if you think of confidentiality, you're thinking about government security. And if people in companies understand that their information is important, and I say if because not all people understand that information is important, I think that's a key component. If they understand it's important, then they can secure it. Now, having said that, confidentiality is directly related to the categorization of the information. So I said it's secrecy or secret And I said information categorization because there are laws, and in the world of healthcare, for example, I'll give you one example, just like DOD has locks and keys, the healthcare industry is mandated by law to keep your medical information private, to keep it out of the general public's eye. So how do you apply CIA? Confidentiality, you keep people's records private. Integrity means if you have a bank deposit and you're going to deposit $10, you want your bank to show $10 in your bank account. The idea there is simply that in order to have a transaction go through, there must be integrity in the transaction. Means if I put in $10, you got to see $10. As much as we would like to see if we put in $10 we get 100, you would never trust a bank that did that because they'd probably be doing it to everybody. So the lack of integrity or the loss of integrity in a computer system or a network or a company would harm that company's reputation. That's a big deal. Availability is a real simple one. If you go to an ATM and you want your money, you take your little card and you put your card in there, and the ATM says, "Sorry, Joe, no money." That lack of availability will also harm the company's reputation. We're talking now about companies that span the range from mom and pop garage started bakery to IBM, Apple, the biggest companies on the planet, and all of those companies in between. CIA directly relates to what a company does. When it talks to reputation, you don't want to get a bad can of Coke. You don't want to get a bad X-ray. You don't want to get a bad pick whatever topic for whatever vertical. Anything that doesn't conform to that CIA would be the loss of that company's reputation. So it's a big deal for companies to be able to apply CIA.
Okay, thanks. So again, I think it's a great a great way for us to be able to talk with businesses about what is it that you need to focus on. Some bad ways of applying in my past have been that, for example, I worked for a federal contractor, and it was like dental insurance. Now, I don't know about you guys, but it's okay if my dental insurance company's website is not up and available. I'm okay with that. So the availability factor really was not an issue. But, however, again, when we're talking using the CIA model, it helps facilitate where to prioritize the spending, the focus, and the security measures. So again, my dental website, I'm okay if it's, goes down for a day or 3. I'm still going to, chug along. I'll still go to my dentist. I'll still have, the service. However, when I look at that dental website and maybe my social security number's out there, my bank account because I do auto pays. So now we're talking about my confidentiality is an issue. And then integrity, I don't want to get any more teeth pulled than necessary, so therefore the integrity. So I hope that, our listeners and participants today are kind of getting a feel for why using the CIA model is really important to begin those discussions. Lily, do you have anything you'd like to add before we move topics?
No, right now.
How about you, Randall? You've been kind of quiet too.
That's not usual. No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. So when we look at the CIA model, let's talk about if a business should say that, okay, well, most certainly confidentiality is the top point of that triangle. We need to focus on confidentiality. How do we put measures in place to protect the confidentiality of information? In other words, isn't it keeping things private, confidentiality private? Randall, we'll pick on you first.
Okay. Yes, certainly.
Okay. Yes, sir.
So if we talk about confidentiality, then we have to understand that, you know, for me, all the three principles of the CIA triad are interrelated, because if I don't protect the confidentiality, very quickly I'm going to have an integrity problem. And if I don't protect the integrity, then I don't really have to worry as much about the confidentiality, because the data has been changed. And I have to, you know, ransomware is a great example of that. So I think that it's very important for us to understand each of the three tenets and how they're executed. And we talk about them every day, all day long in our job, but we just don't call it the CIA triad. But that's really what we're doing. So from a confidentiality standpoint, it certainly is very important, but we have to understand that that drives access control. That drives, you know, password requirements. And, you know, it even drives our perimeter security controls, it drives role-based access, and also the need to know, which is very important in healthcare. It's very important in the military and governments. So I happen to think that the triangle turns, you know, depends on the situation. As you said, the availability may not be the most critical, but in other situations, availability is the number one. And so I think that triangle is actually a living model. It turns to meet the demand of the situation, right?
Okay, sounds good. So when we talk about, again, the confidentiality, if the confidentiality is the top of the triangle, if we don't keep that confidential, then it will lead into potentially integrity issues, and then therefore could also bleed into availability issues with, like, for example, if we don't keep the data or the system in which the data is confidential, in other words, ensuring, right, you know where I'm going with this, ensuring that only those that need to have access to that system have access, and no more than that, then if anybody can access the information, then they could therefore modify it, so there goes the integrity, and or they could modify the system itself, and there goes potentially the availability. So let's talk now about access and the importance of the least privilege rule, and if you could explain that. And let's go back to Lily on that one, if we could. Talk again about the least privilege rule and how that's applied.
The least privilege is an employee having the access it requires, no more, no less. Nothing more to compromise confidentiality, but no less that will avoid that person doing the job in a proper way. And finding that balance is the key for security.
Right, because I was just going to say...
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that, you know, in the financial industry, in governments, and certainly in healthcare, you know, we're concerned with the ability to process a claim and pay a claim, because if I have both of those functions at my disposal, then I can commit fraud. And then certainly in the banking industry, they have a lot of audits that are trying to determine where does an individual's access overlap their ability to completely do a transaction on their own without any other step in the process that is not under their control. And that access without the least privilege would give them the ability to commit fraud or steal or embezzle.
Okay, so in regards to the least privilege access rule of thumb, it sounds pretty simple and straightforward. Only give somebody enough access to do their job, and that's it. However, isn't it a lot more challenging than when it it suggests, in that a lot of the businesses I've worked with come back with, well, you know, Joe backs up Mary, and Mary backs up Susie, and Susie backs up, so we just give everybody the same level because they all really need that same level of privilege. Even though Joe works for IT, Mary works for HR, and Susie works for finance, that doesn't make sense when you really stop and think about applying the CIA triad and keeping it to only those who really need to do their job. So how do you realistically apply that on a day-to-day basis? Tim, do you have any thoughts on that?
You're asking the right questions, and I want to step back a second, and I don't mean to make this any more complicated than it need be, but your point is not everybody needs the same level of access. Well, in a hospital setting, that becomes very clear. We have multiple hospitals. We have very famous doctors who are leaders in cancer cures and leukemia cures and all kinds of researchers who are out in the research areas, but not in the hospital. So think about the fact that when you go into a hospital, someone has to take you in. There's an intake process, and there's a lot of information that you're exchanging. You're giving them your information. You're saying who you are. Here's your credit card. Here's your payment information. Here is your problem, whatever problem. I came in with a broken elbow. If you put that information on Facebook and you have self-disclosed it, that's one thing. But if you have a very narrowly defined disease that carries with it some kind of stigma, and you happen to be a very famous actor or the President of the United States, you can now start to see that those things could be very important to keep confidential. And there are specific pieces that you don't want all of the doctors or all of the staffers to necessarily know. So as Randall said, in banking, you don't want the clerk to know the same thing as the person that checks out. In the automotive industry, you don't want the designers to have the same information as the salespeople on the floor. So each industry has its own set of governance requirements. Does that make sense? And that's where you have to keep things separate.
Okay, so I guess one of the points that I'm also trying to drive home is the fact that nothing is ever completely written in stone, and that if you come to a business situation where Johnny, it really is backing up Mary for the day, that access only needs to be permitted for the day as well, that there can be time limits in regards to that, and that we as security folks should never come back and say, nope, need to apply the least priv. That's all fine and well, but again, businesses need to operate, so we need to think about how to implement this stuff, even the basics, in a very realistic manner. And again, I think the point again being with the access rules is that it's not permanent. You can set it up for a certain time frame. As well, another thing in regards to the least priv or access controls in general is that you need to pay attention when folks change jobs, that you need to check their access that they've had and modify it. So let's broaden this discussion now up to about good practice around access controls. Anyone want to take that? Randall, you want to take that? Access controls, what are good practices?
He might want to mute. There you go. I think you're unmuted, Candy. Candy. There you go. Yes, so an information security program, I always say, is only as good as its access control plan, because we have systems and we have people who need to interface with those systems, and they need to put data in and they need to get data out. That's the whole purpose of being. So we have to make sure to give the folks the access that they need, but only the access they need. We also need to limit their access based on job role whenever we can. Certainly, speaking of healthcare, just for one more second, we have the principle called what's reasonable. So if you only have 3 people in your company and everybody has the same level of access, that's reasonable for your company. You can't be expected to have 17 different roles if you only have 3 people in your company. But if you have a very large company and you're driven by regulatory requirements, whether that's HIPAA in healthcare, or the financial services, or publicly traded companies, or companies that take credit cards, they all have a lot of regulations that require them to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And that all starts, as Candy said so well earlier, with confidentiality, because if it's not confidential, then the rest of it becomes unimportant, or very important very quickly in the case of an integrity problem. So if I were to implement access control, you would have to identify what systems you have, and identify what the data is on the system, and identify the value of that data to your company. And if it's financial records, if it's patient records, that's very critical, very high value data. And so I have to apply the strongest access controls to that data, and I have to spend my resources wisely and make sure that I protect the most important stuff. And so, you certainly have to start with a password, a unique username, a strong password, and you also have to make sure that you drive your roles by group membership if you can, and make a central repository and allow that to automatically manage your users. So Active Directory is a good example of that. If we use Active Directory, we can set a user to timeout. We can set a user's password to expire. We can even set an account to expire. And in healthcare, I see this a lot, but in other industries, not so much. And that if I have a contractor come in for a 90-day contract, I shouldn't just set their account forever. I should set their account to expire at 90 days. And then if they're going to stay longer, I can extend that date. But the other thing that Candy said also is the time-based restrictions. So if the clerk comes in at 8 and leaves at 5, why do we give her access at 2 o'clock in the morning? And how do we monitor that access to make sure that it's not being used either by her in a way that it shouldn't be, or by somebody who happens to have compromised her account? So access control is a very, very big animal with a lot of legs, right? So I guess that'd be my answer.
Okay, great. Thanks, Randall. And how about you, Lily? Would you like to talk a minute or two about access controls and what some best practices surrounding access controls might be? What would you give for advice there?
Randall covered the time limit that is really good. The temporary accounts for contractors or temporary employees. Also, making sure that the employees change their password, and it covers basic requirements according to the policy of the corporation, and to avoid in the best way to compromise systems, the number of attempts that they allow employees for 3 or 5. In case an attacker tries to hack the system, don't leave it open to attack X number of times. If it's 3 times, the account gets locked out, and they have to call help desk in order to reset their password.
Okay, thank you. So when we start talking about access controls now, we're starting to talk about introducing some rules, if you will, that the end users and or IT need to apply to the systems. So when we talk about rules, that to me speaks about or speaks to the need and necessity for policies. Because if we don't have policies in place, then nobody understands the rules of the game. So anybody want to pick up on policies? I mean, do you agree that that's a fundamental component in information security or cybersecurity? Anybody? Tim?
The need for policies is there whether a company is small or large. A lot of what I've seen throughout my career is that in many cases when I go into a company to help them as a consultant, I find that they need to have their policies written for them because they are not lawyers. They do not play a lawyer on daytime TV. They basically need help to understand that there are laws and regulations, there are federal laws, state laws, there are a complex set of requirements. Let's call them what they are. If there's a law, the law is a requirement. So what do you have to do at the company level? You have to write a document that says if you're in this company scope, identify exactly what you have to do. It says you have to do this, this, and this. If the law says you have to do it, you have to comply with it. And in a company setting, a lot of times there's more granularity to the policies. Now, the discussion has to go into policies, procedures, standards, and guidelines because we have to understand the differences. If we're not yet in security and we hear the term policy, procedure, standard, and guideline, we think, oh, that's the same thing. It's definitely not the same thing. A policy is something that you will do or shall do. It's a directive in nature kind of thing that comes from the law. A standard is something that's typically derived from an organization that has some body of knowledge and understands the technologies to a great detail, a lot of granularity, and you adopt a standard like a Windows standard or a Linux standard or an international standard like ISO, which we can talk about later, or the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which also have standards. A guideline is this is what you kind of should do. So, okay, then where do procedures fall in? Procedures are your step-by-step to implement the policy. I have a policy that says you will do X. The procedures say, okay, take the motherboard out, take this out, take that out, put this in that, put that together, and this is what it's going to look like according to this standard. And in order to be a security professional, you really have to understand that interwoven fabric of all of those. So policies are absolutely critical in an organization.
Candy, I would just add on that the two things that we're talking about are administrative and technical controls. So we can have a policy, and that might be the only control we have. And then the policy says you must do this or you must not do this, and that is an administrative control. And everybody knows what that is, and everybody knows they're not supposed to do it, or that they are supposed to do it, whatever the policy is. Well, then we can add on an additional technical control if we really want to make sure it's being done, and not just because everybody likes to obey our policies. We can put a technical control in place to make sure that the administrative control is actually being followed. And I think that that's what Tim was saying, that the administrative control really is where it all starts. That's where we're saying, here's what you're going to do with the technology, or you're not going to do with the technology. And then in security, we extend that into technical controls, but we also sort of have both of those sides of that equation. You know, we help write the administrative controls, and then we help execute that policy through the use of a technical control. I think that's a very important point to make.
Okay, great, thank you. But I think, you know, that got really technical really, really quick. So I think the fact of the matter is that we need to have rules, and the rules are defined through policies. And, you know, just to touch it on what Tim had mentioned, it kind of scared me for a moment, was he said the L word in regards to policies, and that's the lawyers. So I would advocate that you be really careful about that. You don't want your lawyers to write your policies, because they need to be implementable, not necessarily something that you're going to bring to a court of law. So it depends on the size of the organization or how mature the organization is in regards to working with security. So let's just throw that out there for a moment, if we might. So Lily, would you like to say a few words? What are your thoughts in regards to policies and using them as a means for defining the rules of engagement, if you will?
Like you said, policies are the do's and don'ts of a corporation. They will have to apply to the locals and federal laws and regulations. Make sure that you make them, they are written in a common language so everybody can understand. Don't make it too technical or too elevated that the lower people cannot understand it. Make sure they can be applied, and they will regulate everybody from the top to the bottom.
Okay, great. So I want to go back for a moment and touch on something that Tim had said in regards to scope, because when we talk about policies, right, the scope most certainly is a component of that. And so when we talk about scope, in my opinion, we need to factor in the whole concept that we began this conversation with, and that's the CIA model. So when we sit down with businesses and say, okay, what is the most important thing to protect? Okay, confidentiality, great. So now we need to look at those areas in our environment that have the confidential data. So it plays a little bit on what Tim had said in regards to scope, but also on what Randall had said about doing an inventory or seeking out where in your environment are those critical assets. And when we talk about critical assets, where is that data? Where's the golden eggs? So let's talk a minute about doing an inventory of assets. And what is an asset? Tim, you want to pick up on that, and then we'll share it with the others?
What is an asset? Well, information, first and foremost, is an asset. Intellectual property is an asset. There are lots of things that are not necessarily written down that are assets. Things like computers, your wires, your routers, your switches, your firewalls, your intrusion detection systems, your data loss prevention systems. Anything that the company feels has value is an asset. If you want to liken this to a model, if you bought a brand new Ferrari, I'm sure you would call that an asset. However, there are those of us, myself included, who might have a slightly older vehicle, and yes, that is an asset, and I still have to protect it, so I put it in the garage. And that's what we're talking about here with CIA. I'm not going to give you my car keys, Candy.
Darn it. Oh, well, next time. Randall, you want to pick up on that with the whole discussion in regards to what is an asset and how do you define it, seek it, protect it?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the information is certainly an asset, and with varying value, right? And of course, all of our systems are assets. We're talking specifically about technology. But you know, the desk that the computer's sitting on is an asset also to the organization, and then we have to wrestle. The organization has to wrestle with asset management, so they have to put a sticker on every desk to make sure that they know it belongs to the company. But we don't have any way to put a sticker on our data. You know, I found that is one area of the asset management and data classification where a lot of companies really don't have a good handle on it. But you have to understand not only that the data is an asset, but also what is the value of that asset. And then just the ability to manage those assets from a technology standpoint. You know, it's easy to put a barcode on my laptop, but you know, how do I inventory my data? And even putting a barcode on the laptop sometimes is an impossibility. But so for me, it's understanding where those golden eggs are, which systems have the protected data in them, or the very sensitive data, and who has access to those systems, and what are the data flows to and from those systems. We have to have a very good picture of what's in there, where it's at, how is it flowing, who has access to it, and you know, the logging, and so we get into the entire CIA model when we start going down that road, right?
Yes, absolutely. So I just want to remind anyone who might be watching us live today that you can most certainly ask questions and submit them, and then we'll get those addressed for you. So we're keeping an eye on that window, so by all means go ahead and feel free to submit any questions you might have. Again, today's topic is security basics, looking at what are the fundamentals in regards to our profession and or more importantly practice. Lily, do you have anything you'd like to add in regards to the assets and the necessity for performing an inventory, or at least understanding where that might be?
And they cover everything. Basically, it's identifying what you have and then prioritizing what's more important, what is essential to the company. That would be it.
Okay, great. So now I'm going to see if we can put this all together. So we talked about, again, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability model called the CIA. We talked about least priv in regards to providing people access to anything that might be at the top of that triangle of the CIA model. We talked about policies being the rules of engagement, or the rules in which we'd operate under within an organization, the thou shalls and thou shall nots, if you will. And we talked about applying those policies to assets. And assets can be an piece of information such as personally identifiable information. It can be your laptop, it could be a server, it could be a storage SAN or whatnot. So I think one of you, I think Tim put it, anything that the company finds value in, or one of you had said that. I really like that, because that's exactly what an asset is. So when we look at all of that, one way in which we as information security folks manage that is through what the industry has termed governance, risk, and compliance, the GRC approach. And any of you want to pick up on what GRC is, and how is that truly the glue that helps us to put together what we're talking about this afternoon? Anybody?
I can start out. So the GRC, governance, risk management, and compliance, sort of the three heads of security. So from a governance standpoint, as Tim was alluding to, those are all our policies, our procedures, our guidelines, and our standards. So a policy is sort of the high-level language that explains to you what you can or can't do. The standard is something very specific to a to access control standard, or a disaster recovery standard. It tells us exactly what we need to do for each of those areas. And then the procedures really drive how do we execute that policy within our company. And then we move to risk management. Risk management really is about assessing determining the value, and then assessing the risk to that, and then what would the exploitation of that, I suppose, what is the threat of that, and what is the likelihood of that, and then we put all that together and we come up with a risk equation which allows us to understand what our risk is based on the asset that we're talking about. And risk management is really the whole thing from soup to nuts in terms of doing a risk assessment, documenting, following up on issues until they're closed out or remediated, and then compliance is really the last piece, and that's how do we go back and audit ourselves and check and make sure that we're doing the things that we say we're going to do. And from a compliance standpoint, it really wraps it all up and allows us to be more mature in our security program. So we not only do we say we're going to do it, we check and make sure we're doing it, and we track it, measure it, have metrics on it, and we can understand our total risk picture from the GRC model.
Okay, great. Lily, would you like to jump in here and talk a little bit about what GRC means to you and how you use it to tie it all together?
Yes. To me, it's, like he said, it's bringing the entire company into the same lubricated machine so it can function and cover all the aspects of security regulations and policies that are put in place. And there is actually a website, a company that deals, I'm looking for it, just give me a second. Hold on, please.
Okay, maybe we can come back to you then.
Yes, please.
Okay, and Tim, let's hear your thoughts, and then I'll go ahead and jump in. So go right ahead, Tim, please.
In the biggest sense, if you take two people and you ask those two people to give you an accurate description of something they are observing, and I will use an example to show you what I'm talking about. If I ask you to tell me what you are seeing, you will tell me you see a telephone with a white sticker on it. And if you look at that object from a different perspective, and that's the key, the different perspective actually is valuable because in the world of governance, we don't run ourselves with dictatorships anymore. We are a collaboration of people who have to come from the different IT security, physical security, your HR folks, everybody that has a piece of a company, any work that they do, has to come to the table and help interpret what those policies mean. So there are governance committees in larger organizations that actually help people to understand through their interpretations by looking at those different opinions. So governance isn't just the chief operating officer or the chief executive officer saying, do this. That's not going to work anymore. So governance is a collaborative effort. It is a large, especially in very large companies, it's a very big deal. And you start to learn through governance committees that your executives, the non-operational folks, I'm talking about the people who are very much in charge but are not in the day-to-day operation, meaning they're not turning the screwdrivers, they're the folks who have to make the decisions about risks. So they need this buffer layer of lots of different people who see things different ways, who can collaborate to bring to them the information they need to make those decisions. And as you start working in governance, you start to see there's a risk appetite. In other words, some managers will say, yeah, go ahead and park your Ferrari in front of my house with the keys in it while it's running. The risk of doing so for you might be less if you parked it in front of my house than whether you parked it in a very large city with the keys in it still running. So you start to see that there's some risk decisions. Governance helps the entire organization with understanding the different points of view and understanding how to take those policies. In terms of risk, and we just talked about it, risk has to be something that the organization understands, and if someone brings in a computer system or brings in an entire group of computer systems, like we've brought our cell phones into the workplace, BYOD, in the case where we are bringing stuff into the organization, we're bringing in risk. So the executives and the governance committees have to understand how big those risks are and whether or not the organization can sustain those risks. Some people may be writing a check that they can't cash. That's what I'm talking about when it comes to risk. In terms of compliance, your audit teams have to go behind the implementers and say, did you do it right? A lot of that sounds like checklist work, and people say that's boring, but believe it or not, without that system of checks and balances, you don't have a full view of risk in your organization. So GRC has been built into certain tools, and those tools, although parts of them are checklist-like, they are still things that many people have to come together in the company and talk about. And in a small company, it gets very difficult because you have not got the number of people you need to actually do the implementation strategically and tactically. So GRC is a big deal as well. Security needs people to go into GRC.
Okay. Wow. That was really good. However, being the type of girl I am, I have a different perspective. I would almost argue that GRC is actually backwards, the way that I have often applied it. When we talk about compliance, compliance speaks to complying with, fill in the blank. Comply with your policy, comply with the laws, such as HIPAA, such as payment card industry data security standard, such as, fill in, the, again, the blank, right? So those are the drivers, and again, saying what the rules of engagement are. We need to comply with the rules of engagement. If we don't, there's certain risks that happen, right? Because compliance, in my opinion, is a risk factor. If we're not compliant with HIPAA, we're not compliant with PCI, that's a risk to the organization. Just as much as if we do not apply the least privilege correctly, or the perimeter is not secured correctly. There's lots of risks that an organization must understand. But first we need to understand what the rules of the role are, rules of the game are, through the compliance effort, right, the policies. A lot of our policies are written to support regulatory things such as HIPAA, such as PCI, such as FFIEC, or whatever. So then we need to look at how well are we complying with that standard or our policy, and then it introduces the whole concept of risk. And when we say, okay, well, you know what, we've got a lot of risk in that we parked our Ferrari outside of Tim's house versus downtown Manhattan, then now there's a discussion. We understand the risk is that the Ferrari is parked out in front of the house with it running and the keys in it. That's the risk. The discussion becomes down to, is it parked in front of Tim's house or is it downtown Manhattan? Because those actions between the two are different. And that's where the governing body is going to make that decision as to how that risk will be addressed. Are we going to accept the risk being parked in front of Tim's house because Tim sits out on his front porch with a shotgun, or are we going to, be downtown Manhattan where, everybody turns a blind eye? So I would almost argue that, as professionals, we've reversed the order of that GRC. But I think we can all fundamentally agree that GRC is a means and a methodology for looking at what's going on in our environments in regards to security and the level of protection. Anybody want to jump in on that whole thought process?
Yeah, I'd like to add that The example I like to use is when we start up a new company and we're making all these decisions. Well, we need to put a firewall in. Why do we need to do that? It costs money. Why do we need to patch all of our computers? Because that takes a lot of time, and then a lot of people have to hire a bunch more people. So I'd rather just not do that. You would have to ask the question, well, if we don't do these things, what's the risk? Well, if you connect to the internet without a firewall and you don't patch your systems, the real risk of that is that very short order you're going to be compromised by somebody, and then you won't be able to access your data, or your systems will be down, or then data will change or be modified or destroyed. So those are things that we think of in terms of risk management. Sounds like such an alien concept, but it really is our thought process inherent in everything that we do. Whether we get up in the morning and we lock our door when we leave, everything that we do, we are constantly thinking about risk management in our lives. And security, really, we're applying that same methodology just in terms of different controls and processes that we have. So the risk is too high to leave myself unprotected and unpatched systems, so I have to spend that money. That's a business cost. And so as a security professional, you are assessing that risk, and you're making a determination as to the level of that risk and the severity of that risk, and then you're telling the company. You're not saying, I'm the security guy, you have to go buy a firewall. You're saying, I've assessed the risk, and here's what it is without a firewall and without patched systems, and it's very high, it's intolerable risk. And the business will then say, okay, then that's a justifiable business cost to go buy that firewall and stick it in place and go patch our systems and hire the people to do that work. So that, for me, is what risk management is really all about. For me, it's all, as I said before, every morning when you wake up, you're making risk management decisions about your life, and we just apply that in security.
Oh, okay, great, thank you. Lily, you've been quiet for a little bit, so first off, we'll ask you, did you find that link? And if so, we can provide that to our audience after as well. But I want to ask you, we're talking now, we've shifted the discussion from policies, compliance, and now looking at it from the risk perspective. Who owns the risk within an organization? Is it one person? Is it multiple people? Who owns that risk?
I'll go ahead and jump in then. I would say the business owners own the risk. The CEO or the board of directors or the stakeholders or the stockholders, maybe, they're the ones that really own that risk. And as an employed security professional, it's just your job to assess the risk and advise the business on what that risk is. And then they own the risk. The business owner may own it for a specific system, but ultimately it's the business itself who really owns the business. They're the ones that are ultimately going to pay the price if that risk is not managed correctly.
Okay, I'm going to go back now to Lily. You want to jump in on that? Any thoughts in regards to?
An example of that, we had a penetration testing done on a company, and the website, they conducted business online. Everything was done online and over the phone. The website they were using to conduct their business was completely insecure. We were able to retrieve information from previous clients, including usernames, password, credit cards, addresses, everything from that insecure website. The owner said, I don't care because I'm not hosting it. So you don't care because you're not hosting it. It is your website, and the people are putting their information on your website. You are responsible for that information. So it is the owner's responsibility to protect the information and make sure the risk is minimal.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So I'm going to, share some war stories here. So oftentimes I've been in organizations and, it's always been a challenge to get people to recognize that they don't necessarily own accepting risk on behalf of the organization. So let's shift that discussion now to the escalation of issues and/or risks. And isn't that now what we're talking about with governance? Because when we talk about governance, it's truly how an organization governs itself. And when we talk about security governance, it talks about the process in which escalated issues should be raised. So again, backing up even further, back in the day when I would be working with folks, businesses, to say, okay, you really need to upgrade that system because it's not supported anymore, and they keep pushing back saying, sorry, but I can't do that. We'll just accept the risk. I would end up in a tit-for-tat discussion, and it got nowhere, and it really is not a healthy environment for anybody. So how do we go about applying a governance structure and model to address these things? Tim, do you want to take that one?
Sorry,
And you're on mute.
I was trying to unmute this interesting, fun stuff. There's something to be said about growing up in a company. There's also something to be said about the concept of escalated issues. I did a talk on how to talk to C-level executives a week or so ago, and one of the things that a lot of times people miss is that while there may be a very high risk, the organization doesn't always put an ear to the problem unless you can make it easy for them to understand. And C-level executives have been taught to quantify. They have been taught to pay attention to the numbers, to the dollars, to the people, to the percentages. If you don't know how to quantify risk, you end up waving your hand saying, it's going to fall, the sky is killing us, it's going to fall. And the executives are not going to listen to that. If you come in, I think it was Randall a moment ago that talked about a little bit about looking at your risks. If you come in and you actually quantify the risks, where you're not saying everyone is going to die because of this risk. You're saying, okay, we've got this system that's got some problems. We need some technical, administrative, whatever type of control you're wanting to put in place. We need to do this. Well, that doesn't mean we have to buy an entire new system tomorrow. It means we have to start the planning process to maybe in a year have that system gone and have the new system in place. If there's no budget for that system, then okay, who's responsible for the budgeting? And in many cases, the security person, even though you're not the operational implementer, you're the person behind the scenes who is actually helping the entire organization. And that's what I like about security, is that you don't have to be the person with the most responsibility to implement, to actually go out and change the machine. You would be the person to help the organization see, help the C-level executives see that there is a need to start the plan, that we're failing if we don't plan on replacing the system or adding a firewall. That's what I wanted to get to, was the concept of a firewall today is a best practice. There's no reason why you would operate without a firewall. Someone who is ignorant of security, and I was just asked this, by the way, by a group of investors. So would you see the lack of security as a barrier to entry? And I said, no, if you're ignorant of security, you don't understand it. It's as the security person, you actually get to help educate people. You help train them in the world of going deeper on things, and you help them also see a bigger picture. You can help them see concurrently that you have to keep planning for improving your security while at the same time you're helping your operation. I don't know if that's making sense or resonating, but that's the key to security today, is you have to have a bigger picture.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that response. So just to recap real quickly, so we've talked about the CIA model, the confidentiality, integrity, availability triad, and how to apply it to have a conversation, not just with business, but anyone, right? What's the most important to have? We talked about at least privilege and having a need to know access to information, and then putting that together into policies that describe the rules of the game, if you will, and then how do we know what to apply the policies to through looking at assets. And an asset, again, is real simply put anything that the company finds value in. So I think let's come full circle now and look at we talked about the methodologies, the foundation of information security. So let's talk about folks coming into the profession now. I know that this is like really can be overwhelming for somebody who's just starting to get interested. I know obviously there's degree programs now that 4, 6, 8 years plus. So where do you start? You've identified as an individual that you would like to get into information security. Where do you start? Is there any good books out there? Let's start with books and we'll progress into other areas. And let's take it from a diverse background, anybody from cross-career, coming in from other professions, to somebody coming out of high school, going into college or university, or even just, poor, John who's working at the supermarket as a cashier wants to, get into this profession. What are some really good books that you can pick up to get a sense of what information security is, and get some of these fundamental principles behind us? Anybody? Randall, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I will. For me, I think that if you just go and pick up a Security Plus book, you really start to understand some of the technical fundamentals, ports, which ports operate, which services operate on which ports, what is a firewall, what is encryption, and really having that basic foundational knowledge is very important, because when you're talking about some of the other things that we deal with, the initial level, you get into a help desk or a security support type of a role, which is where most of us would find ourselves in the beginning. We have to understand how that operating system works. We have to understand how the operating system of this computer talks to the operating system of this computer, and how does the application on this computer talk to the application or database on this computer. So how do those, that's the OSI model, right? How does that work? Really understanding that, because the better, you'll be a better security person with the knowledge. And if you just go in there and say, I have a security plus and I'm an expert now, you'll have a rude awakening pretty quickly. But it is that your value to that organization is really understanding, as well as anybody or more, how those things work, and how do they transfer data, how do they store data, how do they encrypt data, how do they hash their passwords. And having that knowledge really is your value to the company. And so any way that you can build that knowledge, and just the fundamentals, the Security Plus or the Certified Ethical Hacker, taking a class on that, or even watching a YouTube video, your knowledge will continue to tick up until you really have a good understanding of how these systems interoperate, how applications talk to databases, and how does the internet work. In my classes, I always ask them a question, even after they've been through all the Cisco classes. I have a Cat5 cable here, and I'm going to go plug it into the wall. Now what happens? And walk me through what's going to happen when I plug that in there. Walk me through all the technologies and all the protocols and all the things that are going to happen for me to be able to connect out to the internet, and walk me through that. And I find very few people who can actually do that from that level up to getting on the internet and going to Google. So so for me, that foundational knowledge is critical, and even just something as simple as a Security Plus book can get you started.
Okay, great, thank you. Lily, what is your favorite getting started in information security book? Do you have one?
I have a couple of websites that I would like to share with you, and on top of Randall's with the Security Plus, if you're crossing from another field that is not IT at all, I will start with Network Plus. It's a CompTIA certification. You can buy the book, and many universities or community colleges offer the training for free. The certification, it's around $350, but it will give you a good idea, the basics and fundamentals of networking to jump into security.
Okay, great.
As
Thank you.
for book, I like this one. It's easy to understand. I will type the information. It's Principles of Information Security. It's not too technical. It covers everything, but in an understandable way.
Great, thank you very much. And Tim, what's your favorite Introduction to Information Security book?
So I'm gonna digress just for a second, because one book is antithetical to what I was talking about with different perspectives, because each author has their own perspective, and as an author, I've written books on TCP/IP, etc. And you get in that channel, and you're in the channel. You're not seeing the bigger picture. So there are three things that you need when you're going for a job. You need education, experience, and certifications. And people will thank you for advising them of that, because they oftentimes don't understand why they're not making it through an interview. Well, if you're missing those key components, that's the hardship. And full disclosure, because I own a training company, I've looked at this for quite a while. In fact, going on 25 years. Shut up, I'm not that old. For the last 25 years, I've looked at vendor training and vendor neutral training, and I'm a big proponent of vendor neutral training because it kind of levels out the playing field, and it allows you to understand the technology in a vendor neutral way, meaning Windows versus a Mac versus a Linux distribution. In the A+ world, which is a CompTIA certification, A+ starts with the memorization required to understand IRQs and communications inside of a computer. Well, you're saying, I don't really need that for security. Well, the bottom line is you need to have the fundamentals at the lowest level to understand, so that you can grow to that highest level. And people want to go to certified ethical hacking, which is a good thing. Yes, I'm an ethical hacker. Okay. I'm also a network defense architect, and I'm also an incident response, certified incident response handler, and I'm also a CISSP, and I'm also, wait a minute, just like Randall, he has a slew of certifications. Where do you start? You start with A+, you bleed into, and it goes into Network Plus, and Lily, that was right on. And then you go into Security Plus. Randall, that was right on. You have to have all of that. And if you don't have a starting point and don't understand that the lower level stuff goes into the higher level stuff, and you start with the higher level stuff, what will happen is you'll have to take 2 or 3 times at the exam, which is exactly what they want. They want to get your money. So what do? you go back and overstudy each step. And we don't do very much with boot camps for that reason. We do more with online 8-week type of classes so that you get the basics, the intermediate, and then the Security Plus, which is absolutely required. Don't kid yourself. Then you get into CISSP. All of the A+, Network Plus, and Security Plus is maybe 20% of CISSP, and it's completely outside of the AP or the EP or the MP. So you really don't have all of the full understanding. And now to get back onto healthcare a second, there's also not just healthcare certifications, but let's go into cloud certifications. Let's go into information technology infrastructure library. Let's go into all of the other certifications that you could do. Where do you start? Pick up a good all-in-one book from Mike Myers. Take a look at the A+, Network Plus, Security Plus. Don't take the exam immediately. Take a look at what the information is so that you can understand whether or not it is your passion. If it's your passion, get in it right away.
And Candy, I would just add, totally agree with everything Tim said, but I think in IT oftentimes, we tend to want to stay in our own silo or our own lane, and a programmer might say, I don't need to know how the motherboard works. I don't need to know how a hard drive works, and a desktop support person may not need to know how the code was written to be able to support an application. So in security, probably above any other discipline within IT, and I don't really consider security to be completely within IT, but at least within the IT realm, security more than any other, we have to understand the basics of all of those things. We have to understand how that hard drive works. We have to understand how the operating system works, because we have to secure it. If we don't know how it works, that's why a hacker's dangerous, because they have taken the time to learn how the hard drive works, how the operating system works. They take it apart, they put it back together again, then they understand it. Now they can go and get in and break it or hack it. And we as security professionals have to have that same curiosity and that same interest in taking something apart, putting it back together again, and seeing how it works. Because I need to know how coding works, because I have to secure applications. I have to know how Windows and Linux operating systems works, because I have to secure those. I have to know how an application speaks to a database, and how a packet travels from my laptop to an internet site or a web application or Google. How does that packet get from here to there? How's that packet created? Because there are lots of ways for me to inject things into those processes, and you will never know it, but I will be in that system. So my having that well-rounded knowledge of all those different areas, not necessarily an expert. I'm not an expert developer by any stretch of the imagination, but I understand coding, I understand how they write code, I understand the different methods. I've taken a few classes because I wanted to know, how does that code work? How does Java work? How does JavaScript work? How does .NET work? And having that understanding makes your security expertise go from here to here, right? Because now you understand it in a way that at least you can hopefully better secure it.
Okay, great. So I agree with just about everything everybody said. However, there's a caveat here, and I'm going to be the little old Boston rebel that I am. I feel that as we are just getting into information security, you really don't need to go down that certification path right away. So I'm the rebel that's going to say, if you're interested in it, just start reading, start learning. I'm going to show you. This is my original book. It's Information Security Management Handbook, and I have it still after all these years from a little known guy called Hal Tipton. But it's important to get out there and get, as we've said, a non-biased approach to information security, because the CIA model, the least priv, all of these fundamentals we talked about today that is not vendor specific. So I would advocate start with ground zero, get neutral information. There's a ton of neutral information through books such as Introduction to Information Security, Information Security Management Handbook. Go that route until you decide where you want to go. One thing we didn't talk about that I, again, as the architect of the cybersecurity career life cycle, can tell you, as information security professionals, we need to be business knowledgeable. So yes, I think it's important for us to go and learn about technology and the components, how a hard drive works, how to set up or architect a perimeter network, or the whole network in general. But I think in general, we also need to work on communication skills, on understanding the life cycles of business. What are the business drivers? Because you know what? That's why we're there, is for the business, not for the sake of security. So that's my little soapbox. I'll get off that. There's a ton of videos out on YouTube. There's a ton out there of websites. We'll share some of this information that Lily, thank you so much for sharing that. We'll post those. We have 3 minutes, so that means I'm going to give each of you 1 minute for closure, for a wrap-up. What are your words of wisdom for somebody just coming into information security? Again, be mindful of the time. I will come off mute when your time is up. So, Lily, let's pick on you first.
Information security, I love it. It's exciting. You're not going to get bored. You're going to have to be always learning, always trying to be at least on top. I really like it.
Great, thank you very much. And Randall, any words of wisdom you'd like to share, please?
Yes, absolutely. So security is a very awesome career if you have a great attitude and aptitude. Those are the two things that you can't be taught. You can be taught the rest, you can learn the rest, but without that aptitude, it's very difficult to pick things up, and without a good attitude, you're not really going to be trusted by the business or co-workers or your team members, and really that attitude, I would say, is even more important than an aptitude. Having that great attitude, I think in security helps you become more than just security, but a part of the business. So, good luck to you.
Thank you, Randall. And Tim, any words of wisdom?
Full disclosure, I agree with both what Lily and Randall say. I too love security. I'm very passionate about it, have done it for many years. What I endeavor to do is I put it out there. I will help people with resumes. I'll help them with interviews. I'll help them understand security to get them in the door, because we need to help each other. We need to recognize that security is currently looking at a geometrical growth over the next 5 years of expanding about 5 times, which means that we need so many people. It's really not funny. It's a very serious shortage of people. So we need people who are, as Randall put it, passionate, motivated, intelligent, that want to solve problems. So I'll put it out there. I'll help folks if they are so inclined. If we find out that that's not what you want to do, I'll say thank you, friends, just like before. I encourage a lot of folks to go into security, and I'd like to think that we have an impact on the entire community by sharing, and I think that's what ISSA does.
Great. I as well believe everything that everybody said, ditto. It's like a kumbaya moment, but most certainly that is one of the things about the ISSA, and I guess, disclaimer here, this is the commercial portion of it. I've been a member of ISSA for nearly 20 years. It has helped me grow just incredibly to all facets and meeting wonderful people like we have with our panelists, and I agree that we need to help each other. So with that, I would like to thank everyone for attending. A post-event evaluation form can be found in the comments section. Please complete the form to enter to win an Amazon gift card. We appreciate your feedback. Your feedback is extremely important to us to make sure that we're on target. As you've heard from our panelists, we're rather seasoned professionals, and we need to hear from you, the pre-professionals and the entry level out there. What are your challenges in regards to getting into this? So also, if you're, I would invite you, if you're interested in participating in this panel discussions with us, we would love to have you participate. If you have any additional questions you'd like to ask the speaker, please contact Leah Lewis, and her email is llewis@issa.org. And for more information in regards to the ISSA Cybersecurity Career Life Cycle, please visit issa.org. Thanks, and hope to see you soon.